The Planet Makers by L. Ron Hubbard. Doyle shook an outraged finger under the engineer's nose.
Magee, do I have to remind you that this entire job is to be finished in the next 30 days? And you've barely started in 4 months.
Sleepy Magee sat where he was, heels cocked up on an explosives box, his soles toward the construction hut stove. He had a visograph planted on another box with a cleared space before it, and in his hands he held a pack of cards. Sleepy Magee of Planetary Engineering Co. Inc. almost never got excited. He did not get excited now.
My contract calls for a bonus of $1 million to your company for every day short of the promised time. But let me remind you that a penalty of $1 million is to be paid to me for every day this job exceeds the specified time. Unless you quit this idle supine.
Doyle was tall and thin. He was easily excited. His color was red and his cheeks were bellowing in and out.
Mr. Doyle, have a drink.
Doyle's blood pressure would have broken a gauge. He turned and slammed into the airlock and was gone out into the methane-ammonia atmosphere of Alpha Jetabo's Planet 6. Sleepy dealt the cards. He dealt them in such a way that they were visible to the visograph, all except his whole card, for this was stud poker. There is nothing peculiar in the playing of stud poker, but this game was with Mart Lonigan, who happened to be on an engineering job of his own 93 light years away. They had not seen each other for 5 years face to face, but Mart owed Sleepy Magee $19,000-odd to date. Mart grinned on the visograph.
Was that Colonial Enterprises?
Yep. What you bet?
1 white. Hold up my hold card again and don't look at it, you pirate, or I'll make that 2 whites.
Sleepy called and dealt the next cards.
You're no closer than he says?
Nope.
Woo! That's a big planet, too.
10,000 kilometers diameter. Your queen bets.
Bartimer the cook stirred stew over the camp range and stole an occasional peek when Sleepy raised his hole card. Bartimer had been with Sleepy for 9 years, one planet or another. Mart Lonigan never found out that Bartimer's silent whistles of surprise or glum looks, which Mart could see beyond Sleepy, meant absolutely nothing, and were in reality a solid part of Sleepy's poker. Bartimer would have given his right arm before he would have cost Sleepy a pot by betrayal, but Mart, being a trusting soul, did not know that. Sleepy yawned. He was about 6'6", and he had little weight to go with it, no matter his huge appetite. He drew $50,000 a year as a field engineer for Planetary Engineering Co. Inc., and he dressed something worse than any one of his cat men. It was said of him in certain unsavory places in the universe that he could drink more liquor, play better poker, shoot with less compunction, and yawn wider than any spaceman alive. That was exaggeration. He had met a man on Pylos who could play poker just as good. The airlock whistled and slammed shut, and Tomer Kaltenborn came into the construction shack, tugging off his helmet. Tomer was excited. He was a very young engineer, Tomer. He had come up as junior assistant to Planet 6 as a replacement for a man who had carelessly tried to smoke inside his helmet. And Tomer recognized that he was having his chance, and recognized, too, that he had ample opportunity to make it good. No single school practice which Tomer had been taught was being followed on Planet 6. This was upsetting. It made his black hair stand up bristly straight and made his spectacle-rimmed eyes squint with disdain. If Sleepy Magee was an example of planetary men, Tomer knew that one Kaltenborn would go far. Very far.
Number 18 cat's been sabotaged. That's the 5th example of tampering since we got here. You've got to come out. The link pins are gone on the right tread. That leaves us just 5 cats. how are we to smooth down whole mountain ranges with 5 cats?
Sleepy didn't have to look up. He knew what Tomer looked like. He knew what the construction hut looked like. He said,
Hello, Tomer. Glad you came in. This Visigrath reception is bad. Very bad. We got any spiderwork steel left?
Sir, that cat...
How much we got?
About 90 kilos.
Sleepy squinted unseeing at his cards.
Well, run me about 20,000 foot tower outside here and put an aerial on it. And while you're about it, you might as well put one on the opposite side of this chunk of mud. Put in a relay.
Sir, number 18 cat.
Run it in a hole and shovel dirt on it. Tell Maloney I want the towers done by daylight. When Mart deals, I can't tell a spade from a club.
Tomer glared. Resolutely, he put on his helmet, looked his contempt for a moment, and turned back into the airlock. Bardaber sniggered, and Sleepy called the poker hand. Mart was found to be trying to make 2 jacks look like 3. Reception was really bad now. Sleepy knocked off the game. He got up, poured himself a neat slug of old Space Ranger, handed the bottle to Bardaber, who, truth told, liked vanilla extract better, and got himself into a suit.
That Mr. Tomer, he wants your job pretty bad.
He can have it.
And that Mr. Doyle, he's just plain froths. I never hear such a bloodthirsty man. You look out, Mr. Sleepy.
They aren't so dangerous.
Well, just the same, I got a couple voodoo charms and a wax figure,
said Bardaber, and made a vicious attack on the stew. Sleepy went out into the twilight of Alpha Jetabo's Planet 6. The place would be named New Eden when Colonial Enterprises took it over. They had it on lease from the Tron Main Confederacy. Sleepy looked at the distant mountain range, all rock and corners, and sighed. Certainly it was true that they had not made much progress in the 4 months they had been there. The one valley was about completed, which left a few billion square kilometers untended. It also left water and soil and air. The planet was smaller than Earth, but had a similar gravity. It would be a mono-season job, with an equatorial temperature of about 90 average. Its year was about 1.5 Earths, and outside of the blue character of Jetabo's Planet 6 would not look too bad when it was finished. They were burying the cat as ordered, and an inertia ship was taking off with a cargo of spider steel to erect the opposite pole tower. Tomer was standing on a pile of new rock looking at a blueprint. It was a pretty blueprint, being a Mercator with seas and rivers designated by flamboyant names. It was the prospectus blueprint of the Colonial Enterprises Advertising Division. And while it sold plenty of property, it was not a very good guide for engineering. However, that was nothing to Tomer. The job was contracted to be this way, and this way it would be. A contractor's first duty was to his builder. Sleepy looked at the blueprint.
Honeymoon Bay? Bidawee Valley? They always get dopey eyes like this. Kid, don't take it so much to heart.
Tomer glared through lenses and helmet and said,
We haven't even begun to construct these things. We had been more on the job, we would have found the saboteur, and we would still have what equipment we need. 1,000 kilos of powder, blown up. 20 million feet of cable, ruined. And now most of our cats out of commission. We never finish. This will bankrupt the company.
Well, kid, if you go worrying like that, you'll get ulcers. And when you have ulcers, you can't drink. And when you can't drink, you can't stand a place like Planet 6. And there goes your career. Come over here and get somebody to drill some holes.
They had the tower up, well pinned into the native rock, in about 2 hours. Sleepy looked admiringly up at this giddy spire into the methane clouds.
I guess that'll do. That reception was getting so darn bad that Mart won 5 pots today. When they get the other one.
Maloney, straw boss of the dirt gangs, interrupted him.
You mean we've been putting this thing up Just so you could play poker with that crazy Lonergan?
Sleepy yawned and smiled.
Well, Maloney, when you get as old as I am,
I'm 5 times older than you, and you know it. Somebody just hooked every fuse we've got. Unless you can invent one, we ain't got a single detonator in camp. Who the devil is doing this? By golly, if I get my mitts...
now, we'll invent something. It'd be 2 months before we could get a new order of anything up here.
2 months?
Cried Doyle, who had toiled perspiringly toward them over the rubble which had been a mountain range.
2 months? I'll have colonists here in 30 days, Magee. I insist we line up these men and interrogate them one by one. There's somebody in this camp who doesn't want this planet completed.
You interrogate one by one, and they'll quit 2 by 2. These men are loyal. You'll have to find something else. Maybe a methane metabolism goon or a lost race. You let me do the worrying, Doyle.
But you aren't worrying. I have to think of my company's reputation. Do you have any idea how much money is being tied up here?
Well, considering... Well, if you figure this planet at 1 billion arable acres, and the acres at $2 a piece, I got some idea.
But they're not arable yet.
And he swept a despairing hand across the twilight vista. Truly, it was an ugly sight. In the shrinkings and contortings of a new-made world, vast escarpments had been heaved up. In the bluish, ghastly light, the raw, soilless, plantless valleys and mountains were nightmare stuff.
You'll never finish.
Sleepy shrugged. He turned around and went back into the construction shack and threw his helmet down. Tomer went into the communications dome and sent a long, telltale message to Planetary Engineering Construction Co, Inc. Doyle, shortly afterward, poured a flood of grief into the ether on his own. At 8:17, there was a loud flash. They poked in the ruins and went to report to Sleepy, but he was snoring in his bunk, and Bardaber would not let him be disturbed. In the morning, Sleepy Magee shoveled in 20 hotcakes, washed them down with a quart of milk, chased it with a brandy, and was ready to face the day. He found Maloney and Tomer sitting disconsolate on a pile of demolished scenery and pulled them into his wake. He found half a dozen welders and drew them some drawings on a piece of sheet metal and sent them on their business.
I heard footsteps walking around last night,
Said Doyle, coming up.
Footsteps most always do.
Are you trying to be nasty?
Doyle, for all his height, was a big man. Sleepy looked him over.
Now that I come to think of it, yes.
Sleepy answered finally.
We've been having a lot of hard luck on this job. Some rival of yours, or ours, has slowed us down to a walk. You haven't made things any easier.
I don't sit around all day and play poker and drink liquor.
I'm not dumb, and I don't have dirty fingernails.
Are you being insulting?
I never mix words. I am being insulting. In one brief, 4-letter word.
Doyle struck at him. It is very difficult to work or fight in a methane ammonia suit, but the blow staggered Sleepy. He went down on one knee and stayed there with the eye of every construction man upon him. Languidly, he got to his feet. Suddenly, he grabbed Doyle, avoided a second blow, and pitched the colonial man about 10 feet. Doyle hit, and he started to get up, but Sleepy's boot sent him down again. Doyle tried to rise a second time. Sleepy let him get all the way to his feet, and then, with a short one to the midriff, knocked him gasping.
I'll get you for this. I'll report you.
Not on my visiograph.
I'll return to your company. This will cost your company $1 million.
and Doyle got up and ran to the Colonial Enterprises ship in the valley. Sleepy watched him go, watched the ship take off, watched the weird glow of the wake after it was gone.
He'll make a lot of trouble.
Kid, I was born out of calamity by trouble. Any engineer is. Maloney, put a strong seal on Mr. Doyle's hut and don't let anybody disturb it. We wouldn't want to be accused of stealing his clothes.
He'll be back here in a month. That ship isn't any freighter. And he may bring in space police for assault.
He looked at Sleepy. Brawling. It was uncouth, ungentlemanly.
Be that as he will. Let's go to work.
The mystified welders were putting holes under the huts, and it took them a long time to understand that Sleepy wasn't entirely crazy. Every now and then, one of them would come into the construction shack, see Sleepy playing poker, open his mouth to speak, remember Doyle, and back out. They passed 2 nights of double-shift construction with guards posted against sabotage, and then Sleepy condescended to come out and inspect what Tomer had been overseeing. 12 huts were all on sledges as though to be dragged away. The men, glad that the work was done, dragged themselves into their bunks and slept. Sleepy sent for the atomic electrician, a driller, and a shooter. They put a few tools into a 1,000-mile-an-hour ground scanner and disappeared into a cloud of country rock, leaving a worried Tomer to sit and twiddle his thumbs and wait for the message he thought would come from Planetary, relieving Sleepy. For 5 days, Sleepy and the 3 men were whereabouts unknown, and then they returned, tired, hungry, and dirty, parked the scanner, and turned in. The following morning, Sleepy got up around about 11, yawning and stretching and making jokes with Bartable. Tomer was all disapproval.
Where did you go?
Had to block in the oceans and rivers, didn't we?
Said Sleepy with a wink at Bartable.
Have a drink, kid.
I don't drink.
Well, there's no harm in that. But I always say a good engineer is a lot better a quart later. Why, you ought to hear some of the things I'd planned when I had 2 quarts. One time, I figured out a scheme to build a bridge from Mars to Jupiter. And I would have done it too, only the sun kept getting in the way. You see, it would have radized the metal. Nobody could have crossed. And then there was the asteroid assembly project. I did that on a bottle and a half. You ball up all the asteroids of some busted planet, and they catch fission, and you got a sun close to cold planets which revolve around the original sun, and lights and the...
I'm sure it is impractical.
Mr. Kaltenborn, if Mr. Sleepy says it'll work, it will work. I seen him take.
But Tomer had left in disgust. About 1 o'clock, Sleepy called the men together and made them take loose tools and equipment into the 12 sledged huts. Then he ordered the men themselves into the huts. At 3, he and the atomic electrician took a lonely stand on the deck of the construction hut. Sleepy pulled out a bottle.
Here's how.
How?
Said the electrician with a grin. Sleepy put his foot on a plunger and pressed. Suddenly, the upper atmosphere of Planet 6 began to glow in pulsing sheets. The glow spread and brightened until it blotted the daylight. A beating concussion was faintly felt on the ground, and Sleepy braced himself against the outer wall. He gravely presented the bottle again.
Here's how.
The electrician grinned.
How?
They wiped their mouths by scrubbing them into their fur collars. The electrician shoved down on the second plunger. There was a growing roar, and the ground began to shake harder and harder until the mountains reeled and danced under the pounding of the upper flashes. Suddenly, the rain came. It was torrential. A man without a helmet would have drowned in a moment. The great drops battered at the rocks and rebounded until the entire surface everywhere was a racing blaze of water which mirrored the upper flashes. In a few minutes, the valley where the cats had worked so long was so full that all was covered from sight. half an hour, the sledges themselves had become boats and were floating. The water was shocked and beaten by the repeated earthquakes, and the ranges of mountains, invisible through the downpour, suddenly displayed themselves by their gigantic flashes. They were exploding into volcanoes. The 20,000-foot tower, anchored by force rays, shook under the onslaught, bending and quivering, but standing just the same. Sleepy pushed the bottle inside his helmet trap and said,
Here's how.
and drank once more, handing it to the electrician.
How?
And the third plunger went down. It was time to duck. The sledges were bobbing already. Shortly, something else would hit them. Wind. The blow began to scream in earnest about 7, and it kept up ceaselessly for the next 3 days. The sledges were protected by the volcanoes to some extent, but they were battered nevertheless by a 100-mile-an-hour storm. What the speed of wind must have been 5 miles up, no one could calculate. What batterings the hills and mountains took was not subject to mere computation. Like a million banshees cut loose all at the same time, the hurricane roared on and on. Now and again, mountains belched. Again and again, new chain reactions went off in the upper atmosphere, and the water rose and rose, and the waves surged and beat. Sleepy played no poker. The visograph was out of operation for the moment. He lay in his bunk and read an erudite treatise called Shady Ladies, and sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. Whatever Tomer might be thinking about all this was no concern of one Sleepy Magee. About 9 o'clock the morning of the 10th day, Bartimer shoved a cup of hot coffee into Sleepy's sleeping hand and said,
The rain stopped.
That woke Sleepy. He went to the leaded glass port where somebody had written the names and addresses of a half a dozen faraway girls and wiped off the chalk smears. Indeed, the rain had stopped, but the hurricane wind continued. Sleepy drank his coffee and let the gale blow itself out. At 3 that afternoon, the waters were calm and settling, and he stood on the deck of his sledge and waved to men coming out on theirs. All 12 had weathered the elements, being undentable and self-contained, but 2 had dragged their moorings and were about a mile farther on. Lifting his helmet gingerly, Sleepy took a sniff at the air. It was good, and he removed his helmet. Jetabo's bluish haze was not so blue now, being filtered through a mist, and the aspect of this planet was something to gratify Sleepy's heart. The water was draining away in huge rivers. The wind, having eroded mightily against every protrusion, had provided enough silt to color the streams brown. There would be bottomland and soil. The following morning, Sleepy took off in a scout ship they had dredged up. He flew at 90,000 feet with tracers taking down all necessary data. When he returned, just after dark, he had a map of the planet as it now existed, and he could send, by latitude and longitude, 4 other planes to scatter tons of various seeds. When he had sent them, he found Tomer recovering from a bad case of seasick. Tomer was sitting by the galley stove, being consoled by Bartimer and trying to get warm. Sleepy was about to add his condolences when a sputter of jets told of a landing spacecraft and visitors. Doyle was in complete helmet and ammonia suit, as were the rest, and they were astonished to find a window open. Nervously, Doyle made a motion to close it, saw that Sleepy, Bartimer, and Tomer wore no helmets, and gingerly removed his own.
I got action. I brought your vice president in charge of construction, and he has seen fit.
Hello, Sleepy. What's up?
You're in time to inspect, but have a drink.
He poured several tumblers full.
She's got a proper atmosphere with plenty of water in the right places. She's got soil, and the boys are out scattering seeds to hold it where it is. Well, I guess that's about that. We're 9 days ahead of the deadline, so that's a 9 million bonus.
Doyle didn't drink.
That's impossible. When I left here 21 days ago, nothing had been done. You worked for 4 months.
You mean we studied potentials for 4 months?
You could have done this in half the time. I demand to know why you fooled around with those cats.
Come.
Said Sleepy, and moved his languid length out to the deck. He took the others over to the hut, which had been sealed on Doyle's departure, and had the seal struck off.
Witnesses will state that this has not been opened since you last entered it, Doyle. Come in, gentlemen.
Sleepy then began to tear up the flooring with a crowbar, and shortly there were revealed cat track pins, detonators, and all manner of necessary small equipment.
The cats were bait, Doyle. Bainsley here can tell you all about such things. You wanted to slow us down, and you thought you did. You would have gotten an entire planet remake for nothing, and transportation for your colonists as well, if this sabotage had succeeded. But you didn't kill any men, so don't think my company will make a charge. You'll have to talk it over with Bainsley, of course. But unless you've got 9 million cash here and now, Planetary Engineering Construction Co. Incorporated will be putting up one planet for auction. And that's profitable enough, Doyle.
The inspection party had left early in the afternoon, taking the hope of Colonial Enterprises with them. Bardaber was getting dinner and singing about a gal who wouldn't say her prayers. And Tomer sat listening to the sad, sad fate of that creature. Tomer's gaze shifted to the visograph and the stud poker game with Mart Lonigan. Mart was winning today, and his debt was down to $18,000.
Mr. Magee, do you think it would take me very long to learn stud poker?
Why no, Tomer? Not at all. And in fact, I'd be willing to teach you myself.